Hey, what's up? I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to the Sit Down. David Rubenstein is here with us. He's got a brand new book from Simon Schuster, How to Lead Wisdom from the World's Greatest CEOs, Founders, and Game Changers. David, welcome. How are you?
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You got it. So you've had a really extraordinary career when it comes to the world of finance and business and politics. You've brushed shoulders with a lot of the people that you write about and talk to in this book. Where does the idea come from in terms of putting this whole book together?
Well, I wasn't an interviewer by nature, but I became the president of the Economic Club of Washington about a dozen years ago. I was supposed to get speakers to come in. I found out they were mostly boring speakers. So I said, maybe I could liven up by interviewing them. And then ultimately Bloomberg saw it. And I said, why don't you go on TV? And then PBS saw it. And they said, we'll put it on PBS as well. So I took some of the best interviews and then put them together. And I thought people would enjoy learning more about leadership and so forth. So that's where the idea came from.
So you mentioned the fact that speeches can be a little bit boring. When you're interviewing these people, what's most important to you? Because we know about the careers of a Jeff Bezos, a Tim Cook, and Oprah. How do you get new information out of these people?
Well, I think I try to know them reasonably well before the interview so they feel relaxed with me. And secondly, I try to use humor a bit to try to open up them a bit more because they, when you use humor, people can feel relaxed more and they might tell you something that they might not have otherwise told somebody. So I don't try to ever embarrass people, but I do like them to talk about their youth or how they overcame adversity, and people are willing to open up about it.
I think that'll be really fascinating to a lot of different people. Why don't we just start running through some of the names on the list? Why don't we start with Jeff Bezos? What was most interesting in your conversation with him?
Well, Jeff is somebody I've known for quite a while because when he was starting his company, he had to use a bibliography of books in print that one of our companies had. Unfortunately, we didn't get a piece of the company that he was offering. I think he was offering 20 to 30% of the company, and we turned it down. That was a big mistake. But I've gotten to know him over the years. He's obviously built an incredible company, almost not single-handedly. He's got 800,000 employees, but he was the driving force. And at the time that I did the interview, we had about 2,000 people in the audience because we were waiting to see whether he was going to announce Washington as a second headquarters city. So a lot of people showed up to see if he was going to make that announcement. He didn't, but it's clear he has a great sense of humor. And among the things he pointed out is he doesn't make any big decisions before 10 a.m., doesn't make any big decisions after 3 p.m., and he likes 8 hours of sleep a night. I mean, I don't know how he did all that, but that's what he said. So I wish I could go back and get 8 hours of sleep a night. I'd be worth $200 billion like him.
How about the fact that he's making decisions in such a small amount of time? That's pretty fascinating to me.
Well, he's only making a couple decisions a day. He says he only likes to make 2 or 3 decisions a day. Everything else, he figures he just doesn't need to make big decisions on other subjects. So he doesn't like to make 25 decisions a day, 2 or 3, and he thinks that's it. And everything else is kind of handled by other people. So he thinks he can do that.
So what was it like comparing him to Tim Cook or somebody like Bill Gates? What are some of the differences between those guys?
Well, Bill Gates is a person that processes enormous amounts of information. I wouldn't say that he has a natural sense of humor about things, whereas Jeff Bezos has probably a bigger laugh and probably a more sense of humor. So they're different people. They're our neighbors, and I once interviewed both of them together, and that was quite something because they'd never been interviewed together. Unfortunately, there's no tape of that. But I'd say Tim Cook is different. When you're an entrepreneur and you build a company, it's yours. You're responsible for it. Tim Cook has turned that company into an incredible company, the most valuable in the world. When he took over, the market cap was about $350 billion. Now it's about $2 trillion. So people thought at the time he wasn't going to be able to live up to the image of Steve Jobs. He's tried not to be Steve Jobs, but he's made the company 4 or 5 times as valuable. So done a great job.
And I think that separates him from some of the other people you talk to because he followed in the footsteps of one of the greatest innovators of all time. Right. So what stands out the most, just in terms of Tim Cook being his own guy and blazing his own trail here?
When you meet an entrepreneur, you can tell that he or she is somebody that has a real personality. They have to get things going, so they have to have more of an outgoing personality, I should think, generally. Tim Cook is more withdrawn. He's not a person that if you sat down and had dinner with, you could have a dinner with him. He might not even tell you who he is or what his company is. He's very low key, but obviously his strength is that he knows how to get people to work together, and look what he's done for Apple.
Someone who has a great personality is Oprah, and we've had her in our lives for many different decades. What is most interesting about her story and her success to you, David?
Well, Oprah was basically a person that had to almost raise herself. She was kind of abandoned by her mother for a while, raised a little bit by her grandfather. She was fired from a job in Baltimore, and she looked like her career was going nowhere. And then all of a sudden, she became the most famous interviewer in the world. She would say it's because she learns how to listen. She says she's not great at asking questions, but whatever the people say, when she does ask a question, she listens and pivots. And that's the key to a good interviewer, she says. But she has another quality that's very important called empathy. And when you're doing interviewing, empathy is probably what is she's good at as anybody else in the country in terms of interviewing people.
I think all those things go a really long way. And like Oprah, she's had staying power. Lorne Michaels in the entertainment space has had the same job virtually for several decades at this point. For somebody like you who loves comedy, what did you learn from his story and your interactions with him?
He's been running Saturday Night Live for 45 years, more or less. And he said that what was funny in the 70s or the 80s or in the 90s wouldn't be funny now. You can make jokes about certain things, but you can't make jokes about them now. So you have to evolve, and you have to continuously put up with the large egos that are often very famous comedians. And over the years, he's produced, great people who worked on his shows, but in the end, he's the guy that makes the final decisions.
Evolutions and egos, I can apply those to sports as well. I know you got some Duke connections with Coach K. When you think about his story, he's won at the highest level, but he's also adapted to the game that happens today. What really piques your interest about him?
Well, of course, he's won 5 NCAA championships and 3 Olympic gold medals. He's in his early 70s, done this for 40 years. He's the gold standard. But he's had to change his way of proceeding. In the days when he recruited people like Christian Laettner or Grant Hill, they would be there for 4 years. And he could evolve, they could mature. Now he's recruiting 17-year-olds who are ones and dones. So basically, you have to be a 72-year-old man, go into the home of a 17-year-old and convince that 17-year-old that giving that person control of you for 1 year is a good thing. In other words, he's saying 1 year, I'm going to be able to make you a great basketball player. And he has a very good approach. And one of his approaches that seems to work is to say, look, I coached Kobe Bryant. I coached LeBron James. And you remind me of Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, and I can coach you the same way I did them. If you're a 17-year-old kid, you like to hear that, right? So it's pretty effective.
Yeah. I mean, if you're Zion Williamson and Coach K can pick up the phone and call everybody from Team USA, it's not a bad recruiting tool, right?
It seems to work. A lot of his colleagues didn't like the fact that he was the coach of the Olympic team. It gave him an advantage. But there's no doubt that he is able to recruit very good people. And think about it. He's a white guy, 72 or 3 years old, from Chicago. He's going into the homes of people who are African-American very often and convincing a 17-year-old and their parents that he can do a good job for them in 1 year and help them make a professional basketball player out of them. And it works.
So you have some really good sports stories in here. Phil Knight's story could be one of the best based on his persistence, based on how Nike has transformed the world. What did you learn from him and his journey?
Phil Knight basically had a thesis in the Stanford Business School about creating a company that would import athletic shoes from overseas. Nobody really thought it was that great an idea. I don't think he got a great A on it or anything like that, but he lived up to the idea and he pursued it, and he built the biggest sports apparel company in the world. But he's very low key. And if you're sitting next to him in a meeting, he might not even tell you who he is, or you wouldn't know who he is. And he often wears dark glasses, and you don't even know if he's asleep when you're talking to him or not, because you just can't tell. But low key guy, but very philanthropic.
Another guy who sticks out to me is Adam Silver, and we've seen his leadership and his wisdom, especially this year and in many moments during his tenure. What do you think makes him such a great leader?
Adam Silver has a low ego relative to a lot of people in the sports world. He doesn't say, I'm the smartest guy. Oh, he is very smart. You should listen to me. He kind of works on building a consensus, and he's been in the background for 20 years. He was working as a kind of a deputy or an aide to David Stern, so he learned from one of the best. But he has a low ego. I helped put him on the Duke University board and got to know him from that experience. And I would say that he doesn't brag about what he does. Many people like to brag about their achievements. He does not do that. Very low key, and the owners really, really trust him.
Why don't we go to the world of politics now? And you talked to George W. Bush, you talked to Bill Clinton, Nancy Pelosi. Why don't we start with President Bush? We know a lot about his family history, his work in baseball before the White House. When you think about George W. Bush, what separates him from the rest?
George W. Bush was very underrated. Many people in his own family didn't think he was going to amount to that much, and I think he would probably say he wasn't going to amount to that much either. And as he said famously when he gave a commencement address at Yale, to all you C students out there, one day you could grow up to be president of the United States as well. He wasn't a great scholar, But he ultimately convinced his family he could run for governor of Texas. He did, and won to the surprise of his mother and father, and ultimately became president of the United States. He's a person who's much more intellectually curious than people would know. He loves to read books, but he's not driven by public policy in the way Bill Clinton is. Right now, he's spending his time painting a lot. He loves painting. Bill Clinton really loves public policy. He's a public policy wonk in a way that George W. isn't. But both of them have come together. I interviewed them jointly because they're working on philanthropic projects together, and they really have come to have a mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting how those two have forged a relationship later in life. And also that you mentioned that President Clinton is still so involved in the nitty-gritty of politics. He's always had the charisma. He clearly has the interest still in politics. What do you like when you think about his story?
Bill Clinton is a very unusual person in this respect. Most of the people in this book, and in fact, most people have become leaders of our country in various areas and other when they're in their 50s or 60s or 70s, were not leaders when they were in their teenage years, because the teenage years leaders often kind of faded. You know, when you went to high school, I don't know who the number one student was, the great athlete, maybe it was you, but if it wasn't you, those people probably haven't done as much as you've already done. They fade. Bill Clinton was a superstar student leader when he was an undergrad, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. So he's been a star for quite some time. And as they used to say, he was a rising star in 3 different decades, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then he became president. He's a person, though, who loves public policy, and you just can't talk about public policy enough with him, whereas George W. Bush doesn't care about public policy in quite the same way.
Well, speaking of politics, it's obviously a world that is dominated by men, and Nancy Pelosi has found a way to cut through that and become a really important person. What do you like about the way that she's been able to move through a really difficult field for women a lot of the time?
Well, in the history of our country, 240 plus years or so, she's the most powerful woman we've ever had in politics by far. No other woman obviously was a majority leader in the Senate or a Speaker of the House. She's done it twice. She was Speaker of the House and she lost, or the Democrats lost control, and she came back and became Speaker again. So she has enormous power, and I think people underestimate her political savvy, I think make a big mistake. She has the Democratic caucus really, behind her, and I think she can get things done, whereas many congressional leaders cannot.
How about Ruth Bader Ginsburg? She has many really fascinating qualities to her journey. What is most inspiring to you, in your opinion?
She was first in her class at Harvard Law School, first in her class at Columbia Law School, and couldn't get a job. And she overcame all those disadvantages, had a wonderful marriage. Her husband died, and then she poured herself back into the work that she has now, and she's the rock star of the Supreme Court. We've had about 115 people serve on the Supreme Court throughout our country's history. By far, she's the most loved. When she's introduced, you can get 20,000, 30,000 people to come to a speech that she gives, and I've seen that. Standing ovations everywhere. People admire her because she overcame adversity, she overcame discrimination, she's very smart, she supports a lot of causes that a lot of women like, but she has become very well known because she's had 4 bouts of cancer and has overcome that, and she's still coming to work every day. And as I said to her at the beginning of the interview, how does it feel to have 330 million people want to know what the state of your health is every morning? Because people really care that she stays on the court.
No question about it. David, how about for you? You've obviously studied leaders all over the country and all over the world. You have done great work with the Carlyle Group and in politics. What have been some of the keys for you in your journey?
Well, I got lucky in life. I came from a modest background, so that gives you some drive to work. And I got lucky in the business career. So I'm now in the process of giving away my money, and that's something I enjoy. And I do enjoy interviewing people. I enjoy, the kind of things that I've been doing lately. So my goal is to stay alive because I'm now 71 years old. And when you get to be 71, people look at you like, how much longer is this guy going to be ticking? So I want to keep ticking for a while. And obviously with COVID, you never know, you could be struck down and gone in 2 weeks. So I'm trying to stay mostly in my home and try to wear a mask and not get any diseases because when you're my age, bad things can happen.
Yeah, amen to that. David, when people check out your book, what are some big things you want them to take away when they read it?
I would like them to read it because, one, all the proceeds go to Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, so I'm not making money off it. I'm giving it to Children's Hospital. Secondly, I want to inspire younger people to read the book and say, I can be a leader. This is what this person did. I can do the same thing. And so I really think it's really designed for younger people to kind of get an image of what it takes to be a great leader, and hopefully they'll adapt to some of their own skills and become leaders as well. We need great leaders in our country.
Well, David, thank you for being a leader. Thank you for putting this together. Nice to meet you, and best luck with everything down the road, all right?
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me come on. Appreciate it.